Do you know what time it is? It's supernatural story time. And if you're easily scared, and even if you're not, there's only one thing left to do. Just turn off the lights, because these are stories that you listen to only in the dark.
Night Terrors, Volume 1, Story 1. I lived with my mom and grandmother in an 80s built house in Oregon. One morning around 4 a.m., I got up to get a glass of water because I'd cotton mouth. I walked into the kitchen to find a plate of scrambled eggs on the dining room table. My mom is a teacher and gets up pretty early for work, so I figured they were her breakfast. That afternoon, I got a call from my mom on her lunch break. She asked me why I made scrambled eggs and left them on the table. I said, I didn't. I thought you did. She said she didn't and had no idea where they'd come from. My Nana is 93, can't walk without her walker, and needs help even getting out of bed. She has advanced Alzheimer's and couldn't cook a plate of eggs if she tried. I asked her that afternoon, Nana, did you make eggs last night? She sat silently and refused to answer. I asked her a few more times. She was keeping a secret for someone or something, and the sly and displeased look on her face still gives me the creeps. Next story. It was an old bed. My girlfriend bought it at a rundown furniture shop for $100, and they drove it over in a minivan later that day. Sometime shortly after she bought it, it started happening. I don't know how else to explain it except that when you were lying in the bed and it was totally dark, there would be a scratching at one end and the sheet would start to pull toward it. The bed and box spring were on the floor, so there wasn't an under the bed for anything to be hiding in or a frame to be catching the sheet. It felt like just when a cat is using the corner of a bed as a scratching post, like there were small snapping sounds when the sheets and mattress fabric were released from whatever was pulling on them. Very audible, and you could feel it. We hadn't mentioned it with anyone, yet when a friend went in to take a nap in my girlfriend's room, returned 15 minutes later saying, there's something in your room and it's scratching at the bed. We tore that room apart multiple times looking for a mouse or an incredibly strong bug or anything. We searched the mattress and looked under the piece of fabric that covered the box springs. Her room was small. We never found anything. After moving, it happened once again. She called and had the store switch out her mattress because it was broken. They did. Scratching, pulling, stopped. And those terrifying nights of pulling at the bed sheets that were being tugged off the bed remains a mystery to us all. Next story. In the summer of '06, the Canadian family of a good friend left their house to spend a week's vacation in their permanent residence in Canada. Their son, my friend, wanted to spend his last summer of high school in America, so he house sat. I slept over at his house one night. It was a large house in a partly forested township in Illinois. The house was built on the slope of a small hill, where the basement had a door to the backyard. So my friend and I spent the night doing bro things, eating food, playing Smash Brothers, Melee, etc. At 3 a.m., we locked the doors and turned off the lights and went to bed, each in a respective couch in his basement. After a few minutes of trying to sleep, I heard the heavy oak front door on the first floor slowly creak open. Then, after a brief silence, it slammed shut. The massive door rattled windows. My ears pricked. Then the door slowly creaked open again, pause, slam. Quickly after, I heard a window from upstairs slam shut. Another door from upstairs, one of the light wooden doors, creaked open and slammed shut. Then another window, and more windows, and more doors. The floor above us began to chorus with doors and windows opening and slamming. My friend sat up in the couch. I was too nervous to do anything. After a minute, I heard footsteps upstairs. I briefly considered fleeing out the back door, but was too afraid. The steps were like anyone else's, a normal walking pace and weighty sound to them. I could hear multiple sets. I began to consider that my friends were playing a prank, or that burglars had a stupid plan to scare us out of the house before robbing it. For some reason, neither of us budged. In rooms in the basement, I could hear but not see doors and windows opening and shutting. Any visible door stayed shut. "What do you think that is?" I whispered. He said he didn't know. Between all the doors, windows, and footsteps that we heard, a particularly distinct set of steps began directly above our head. Following the steps with my ears, I heard them walk slowly to the door to the basement. The basement door slowly opened. The steps began going down the stairs. I could hear them approaching, but the darkness hid the mysterious stranger. Step, step, step. Eventually they reached the last step. I squinted ahead, but still saw nothing. I was terrified. The steps approached us and I saw nothing. There was no body, but I could locate the steps perfectly next to us in the couches. Just a few feet away from my friend, the invisible man turned and walked to the basement's backyard door. Step, step, step. He and I watched confusedly as the door's lock slid open, the handle smoothly twist, the door creak open, the backyard motion detecting light went on. The door did not close. Somehow my friend had the balls to walk over to the door. He peered outside, as if he would suddenly see someone after witnessing that. He closed and locked the door. After a brief exchange, we went together into the room nearest us. We opened the door, and as soon as we turned on a light, the window stopped mid-movement. We went from room to room, turning lights on. Each time we flicked the switch, any doors or windows would stop. Upstairs, terrified of the footsteps we anticipated, we continued to turn on lights, shutting windows, locking doors. Then the third floor, the last room, his bedroom, we turned on the light and a torrent of rain began pouring through the window. Oddly enough, the rain drenched his Bible as if by some cosmic joke. We stayed up until sunrise, after which we went to sleep. We never figured out what that was, and I suppose I'll die never knowing the truth. Next story. My parents had just recently bought some property in the middle of nowhere about 2 hours north of Houston, Texas. It's just under 100 acres and had a nice small modern house with a large barn. My father had asked me to come along for this Saturday and help him clean the barn out. Hundreds of spiders the size of my palm, and likely thousands of smaller ones in every corner and crevice. I seriously felt like I was on the set of Arachnophobia, except the barn in that movie had better lighting. That's not the creepy part. But I know how everybody loves spiders, so I thought I'd throw that in. My dad had brought his digital camera with him to take some pictures of the property and the cows that graze there. He took some pictures around the house and put the camera in the truck, only to come back later and find that it wouldn't turn on anymore. He opened the battery compartment and every single battery was gone. He's positive that he didn't run low and try to replace them earlier. Later that afternoon, we decided to go back for a quick drive around the property to check out a whole lot of nothing and lots of cows. Can't take pictures anymore because some body, possibly a ghost, took them. I had forgotten something in the house, my water bottle or headphones. I don't remember, so before we left, I quickly got out of the truck and went back into the house to grab it. I came back and my mom asked where I went, and I said that I went inside to grab something. She was a bit shocked because not more than 2 minutes before, she had locked up the house, and she always double checks her locking by turning the knob and shaking the door. Now, another story is when I was living in a townhouse near downtown Houston. One night, I had just gotten into bed, and I was just laying there, fully awake and looking around my dark room and occasionally shutting my eyes. All of a sudden, I hear this loud noise from my bathroom. It sounded like someone just poured a bucket of ice cubes into the empty bathtub. I'm positive it was from my bathroom. My bed was not more than 10 feet from the bathroom door. I was really startled because what makes that kind of noise? I worked up the courage to get out of bed and look for myself. Everything in my bathroom was in place. Nothing else had fallen into the bathtub. I don't believe in ghosts or anything like that, but those experiences seriously give me the will. Next story. I do believe I once witnessed a case of spontaneous human combustion, though not severe. The story goes like this. Last year I lived with my good friend and co-worker. We'll call him Brian. One day I was cleaning up the living room after a night of drinking. Brian had been sleeping on the couch and, hearing me cleaning, got up to take a shower. Before he went to take a shower, he complained, "Man, my back hurts." So I'm going about my business cleaning when I noticed what appears to be a large burn mark on the couch he had been sleeping on. It was about 2 inches wide and 3 inches deep, and whatever caused it was hot enough to burn through the fabric and actually melt some of the cushion. When Brian got out of the shower, I asked him about it. He shrugged it off and dismissed it, saying he might have passed out with a cigarette in hand. Later in the day, we both went to work. I was serving/bartending, he was cooking. Okay, I was not the only person that witnessed this, and it still kind of freaks me out. It was slow, so I was in the kitchen sipping coffee and making small talk. Suddenly Brian starts screaming and patting his leg furiously. There was an awful stench in the air. Myself and another server run over to investigate while He runs off to the bathroom, thinking maybe the stove sparked a little fire or something. We couldn't find anything. I went to the bathroom to check on Brian, and he shows me his leg. He's got a really nasty burn on his leg. He shows me his pants, and the pants are scorched from the inside. I asked him if he had a lighter on him. He emptied his pockets. Nothing. When we got off work that night, we were drinking and wondering about the couch again. I remembered him complaining about his back hurting and asked to take a look. There was another larger burn mark on his back. We had him lay down on the couch, and believe it or not, the burn mark on his back matched the hole in the cushion. Pretty crazy. Next story. My friend worked at Harrah's Casino in Maricopa, Arizona. Anyone familiar with the area knows that this particular casino is out in the middle of nowhere on the Native American reservation. Anyway, my friend is a normal, emotionally stable white guy who's an atheist. He was working late, around 3 a.m. on the casino floor. He's a night owl, so he was wide awake since this is his normal shift. He is not a drug addict or one to make up bullshit stories. So, here he is in this empty casino, walking into the vacant men's bathroom on the opposite side of the casino floor. He walks in, he does his business in the urinal, and turns around to go wash his hands when he notices someone standing at the sink staring into the mirror. He thinks to himself, "That's strange. I didn't even hear anybody walk in." He gets closer to the sink about 5 rows down and begins washing his hands. He glances over again to realize it was not a man that was standing at the sink, but a woman in a red dress. Right when he's about to say something about her using the wrong restroom, this woman turns her head slowly towards him, and he just stares at her kind of in disbelief, thinking this chick must be drunk or blind not to realize she was in the men's bathroom. As her head slowly turns, her eyes were a dark glowing red. He described it as the red eye you would get when taking a photo of someone. He freaked out, didn't know what the F was happening, and looked down to notice she didn't have any legs. Instead, she had what he described as the bottom half of a deer for legs, and she was walking on hooves. Anyway, as this thing turns toward him, it starts to move aggressively, and my friend ran out of that bathroom, obviously scared shitless. He had his buddies review the surveillance tape of that area around the bathroom, but all that was seen was him going into the bathroom, then him running out of the bathroom. He may have experienced this after all. Next story. In middle school, a friend and I were playing around with some pretty high-grade walkie-talkies his dad had brought home. You know, just calling out to each other down the street, having fun like kids do. All of a sudden, we decided to play around with the channel frequency. After a while, we started hearing what we thought was helicopter chatter. Things about landing zones and what time to pick up certain things from the helipad, along with a low sound of chopper blades. Neat, we thought. We kept listening. All of a sudden, we heard, "Sir, I believe we have a security breach on this channel. We're tracking it now." We looked at each other. Yeah, right, this is some kind of prank. How could they know? All of a sudden, we heard a helicopter off in the distance. It began just barely visible. It looked almost like a news helicopter, except it was painted flat white. The chatter started again, and they said a bunch of things I can't really remember about the helicopter coordinating with people on the ground. All of a sudden, we saw 3 black unmarked vans roll by. SUVs, the kind with tinted windows. Think umbrella. They went down the block and right by us. Holy shit, was that because of us? So we went out on the road. All of a sudden a voice came out of the radio. Meatball 1, stay off the pasta." We were confused. This happened the second we stepped on the road. We assumed our signal was meatball, and the road was pasta? We tested it about 4 more times, stepping off then back. Every time we hit the road, the same message came crackling through about a second later. Needless to say, as kids, we were scared shitless and had no idea what to do. We knew we didn't want to end up in those black cars, though, so we shut off the radios and threw them off into the brush in the distance. And in hindsight, it was only a few meters from us. That was pretty dumb. We ran home and hid. Nothing else happened the rest of the day. And by the way, I don't live near any army base of any kind. Next story. I grew up in a rural mining town in British Columbia. When I was a kid, early 90s, I had a friend whose father, who was a doctor, resided in a large home in my neighborhood. The home, originally built for a wealthy mining contractor, was one of the first ones built in the community. The property was large, containing not only the house, but a surrounding private forest and an old mining shack and a small house for what might be assumed would be servants or guests. It's hard to put into words the size of this forest. Despite being in the heart of the community, you could easily lose yourself in it. In part because of this, it was a prime location for my childhood antics. My friends and I would play fight, hold adventures, and use it as a playground. Nevertheless, we never went in there alone. It's true for most forests that, especially at night, they can often seem foreboding or scary to kids. But despite that, I felt there was something really off about it, even during daylight hours. The few times we weren't playing and sat silent within it, the forest itself would be unnaturally quiet. It had that foreboding feeling, like a calm before a storm, where we'd get a tense anxiety about the location. As kids, it was something we'd brush off and move on from and try to forget. Fast forward many years, the family of the friend who lived in that house moved away. I worked as a page in the local library then. One task involved cataloging the local newspaper collection we had available and making sure it was in order. Sometimes curiosity would get the best of me, and I'd sit there reading some of the more fascinating stories that would make the town's top headlines. And then one in particular stood out to me. I wish I remembered the details, and it would be nice to find it again, but this is what I found. Back in the late 60s, the teenage son of a wealthy contractor who owned that property went missing walking home from high school. Witnesses recall seeing him walk along the road and into the forest surrounding his home. One witness, in particular, remembered saying goodbye as she went in a different direction as he entered the forest. He never left the forest. His body was never found. The only evidence the police ever found was a bloodied blanket in an old mining shack, owned by a hunter who resided close to the property. It certainly made for an interesting read if you didn't think too much about the fact that it was a true story. Next story. This is the story of the Eskimo village that disappeared. In November 1930, Joe LaBelle, a Canadian fur trapper, snowshoed into a thriving Eskimo fishing village situated on the shores of Lake Angikuni in Canada. LaBelle was greeted with an eerie silence. He thought this was very strange because the fishing village was a noisy settlement with 2,000 Eskimos milling back and forth to their kayaks. But there wasn't a soul about. LaBelle visited each of the Eskimo huts and fish storehouses, but none of the villagers were anywhere to be seen. LaBelle saw flickering fire in the distance and approached it gingerly, sensing something evil was afoot on this moonlit night. Upon the fire was a smoldering pot of blackened stew. To make matters more mysterious, LaBelle saw that not a single human track had left his settlement. LaBelle knew something bizarre had happened to the 2,000 people, and so he ran nonstop to the nearest telegraph office and sent a message about his findings to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The Mounties turned up hours later, and they too were baffled by the Mass Vanishing Act. An enormous search party was sent out to look for the missing villagers, but they were never found, and the search party unearthed some strange findings. All the sleigh dogs that had belonged to the Eskimos were found buried 12 feet under snowdrift at the perimeter of the camp. All of them had starved to death. The search party also established that all the Eskimos' provisions and food had been left in their huts, which didn't make any sense at all. Then came the most chilling surprise of all. The search party discovered that all of the Eskimos' ancestral graves were empty. Whoever or whatever had taken all the living villagers had also dug up the dead as well, even though the icy ground around the graves was as hard as iron. Later on that unearthly silent night, the Mounties watched in awe as a strange blue glow lit up the horizon. The eerie radiance was not the northern lights, but seemed steady and artificial. As the Mounties watched, the light pulsated then faded. All the newspapers of the world reported the baffling disappearance of the 2,000 Eskimos, although many believed that a rational explanation would eventually come to light. But the Angikuni mass disappearance is still unsolved. Next story. I live in a house that is surrounded by miles of forest preserve. When I was much younger, my cousins and I would like to go out exploring in the woods. One day we happened on this old abandoned-looking shack. It was pretty dilapidated, but I think at some point someone must have been living in it because there were tattered drapes hanging from the windows and the front door was slightly ajar. There were really old rusted kitchen utensils in front of the shack. I remember a measuring cup and a fork and butter knife distinctly. Bizarrely, in the clearing behind the shack, there were these weird stone monuments. The best way I can describe what they looked like is that they were similar to those fake hives that you might see at a honey farm. except we slowly creeped around back and saw that they were completely solid. I have no idea how the shack or these things got in the woods, because there's absolutely no way anyone would ever be able to drive a vehicle back there, as there wasn't any paved path and the trees were pretty dense. It was a sunny day out, but I remember as soon as we came across the area, this overwhelming foreboding sense came over me. Even thinking about it is terrifying. I have no idea what's come of it. I'm way too terrified to make my way back there again. I hope that somehow it's been destroyed. Suffice to say, I'm always on the jumpy side when it's dark out, because I fear that one day a crazed person is going to come out of those woods from the shack. Next story. My girlfriend used to live in an old turn-of-the-century house, complete with a creepy grandfather clock and various antiques. She always told me about paranormal stuff that went on in the house, but to be honest, I never believed her. She said she would go to sleep with all of her blinds closed and then wake up with them open. Her mom said that she would hear voices, etc., that kind of thing. So I was staying over one night, and she got out of bed to go, I assume, to the bathroom. We hadn't gone quite to sleep yet, and I was wide awake. And then three things happened. First, an empty water bottle that was on the floor spontaneously crumpled, making a very distinct sound, as you can imagine. I didn't know what to make of it, so I rolled over and tried to go to sleep. Meanwhile, down the hall I hear someone turn the water on in the bathtub. It stayed on for about 3 minutes, and then clearly was turned off. I thought it was strange, but sometimes my girlfriend would fill up a bottle in the tub, so whatever. Next, I heard someone come up the stairs, which was again strange because I had just heard her in the bathroom. She comes back into the bedroom with a snack she had gotten in the kitchen, downstairs. I said, "Were you in the bathroom?" She said no, and that she had been downstairs. We went into the bathroom to investigate, and the bathtub is wet. We had showered downstairs earlier, and the blinds next to the toilet were open. Now, I always shut those blinds because they're at the window, and I for sure had closed them about 20 minutes before we went to bed. She hadn't been in the bathroom since before I went. Something had turned on the bathtub for a substantial amount of time and opened up the blinds, which I absolutely remember closing. Needless to say, I was thoroughly creeped out and still to this day cannot explain those three events. Next story. I'm a pretty skeptical guy. I'm an atheist, so I don't really believe in souls and ghosts. But when I was about 11 years old, while walking on the street, I saw this fat lady. She was wearing a big hat with flower patterns. Her dress had the same flower patterns. Then a huge black car came and passed by in front of her, and she just disappeared. I didn't get it. Where did the lady go? This really got me for a few days. But I thought, well, maybe it was my imagination. Whatever, I'm going to ask a friend who actually lives just a few houses from the incident. Now, this is when things get weird. I asked my friend if there was a fat lady on this street, and please notice I asked him only this. He told me, "Oh, a lady with a hat with flowers on it? She's a ghost. Dude, a car killed her some time ago." Holy shit. I refuse to believe what I saw since it doesn't make any sense. But man, do I think about this a lot. Next story. It started one night when I was jolted awake by a dream of a finger being stuck down my throat. I just woke up, figured bad dream, and closed my eyes again. About a minute later, something pulled the leg of my shorts up. I felt the knuckles run up my leg. I didn't move. It wasn't blankets. I slept downstairs on the couch where my now ex-husband spent his nights gaming. It took about a week, but he convinced me it was all in my head and I went to go sleep upstairs again. My second night back in my bedroom, I was jolted awake again, and as soon as I woke up, there was a very audible whispering in the corner of my room. I couldn't understand what was being said, but I was sleeping back downstairs again. My ex couldn't convince me to sleep upstairs. Then on Sunday morning, which was Easter, we went over to his mother's house. I came home early because I had work the next day. I had gotten into the habit of sleeping on my back with my legs closed. Everyone was teasing me that an incubus was after me. I didn't think it was funny. That was the night I was physically pushed awake. I was sleeping on my back on the couch. I'm very tall and my feet were up against the armrest. Remember, I was home alone yet again. I fell asleep and something pushed on my shoulders so hard that when my feet slammed on the armrest, it bruised the bottom of my foot. I started repeating the Hail Mary. I'd gotten into the habit of doing this after reading up on incubuses, and I repeated a few times when from the living room I heard what I could only describe as a layered laugh. I will never forget that sound, like a grunty ha ha ha. As soon as the laugh happened, my dog got off the couch and started sniffing the air around where the sound came from. This was the point that I knew it wasn't all in my head. I waited on the porch for my ex to come home, explain what happened, and he could say I was deeply disturbed. I went out and bought a cross necklace, had someone bless the house, and started playing Christian music very low throughout the house. My ex, once he started trying to protect me, would notice the attic windows opening as he walked outside. We also had a donkey skull mounted on the wall. It had never fallen off before, and it became a daily occurrence, but it would land in places that it couldn't possibly have fallen to. The episode stopped, but I never had an explanation, and although I'm not deeply religious, I still sleep with a Bible and rosary next to my bed. Believe me, I know it sounds crazy, but there hasn't ever been a legitimate explanation. Next story. There have been 4 or 5 separate occasions that I thought made me believe my house was haunted. The first was after my cat died. I was about 10 or 11. While I was sleeping in my bed, I could feel the bed declining, moving closer to my face. I didn't really panic because I figured it was a cat coming to say goodbye. There was another time where my grandmother was staying at our house on the 3rd floor and she claimed to have seen the ghost cat. I haven't seen or had another visit from him to this day. Moving on to our 3rd floor. This is a place where I have had all my creepiest encounters. To start with, my sister one day received a Target cash register machine for her birthday. It was a toy. Well, I took to sleeping up there because of the TV. Anyway, one night I'm sleeping, and during the night, the machine starts going off saying credit approved, maybe 3 or 4 times. I dismissed it as nothing. For the next couple of nights, it keeps going off. Finally, I took the batteries out, figuring this was the cause. Nope. It went off the next night, too. I finally tried to move it somewhere where I couldn't hear it. This one isn't quite as creepy, but it freaked me out to the point that I will not go to the 3rd floor at night. In 2004, the movie The Grudge came out, and my mom and sister rented it since they enjoy horror movies. I don't. I decided to stay and watch, thinking it wouldn't be so scary. I was wrong. I didn't sleep with covers for about 2 weeks. I also left the light on at night. It was a year before I got over the movie, and I was upstairs alone, playing some PS2 game, when I heard scratching coming from the attic. I bolted. I didn't even turn anything off. I had to have my parents go up and turn off everything. In the end, it turned out to be a squirrel. Then the last physical occurrence. I was upstairs once again, despite my better judgment, playing some video game and enjoying myself. Suddenly, from the room across the hall, I hear the phone ring. A phone that hasn't rung in several years because it's been unplugged. I hear the phone ring, and I double-check to see if it really was ringing and not just my imagination. There it was on the wall, clear as a bell. I left the top floor and hid in my room like a scared child again. Since then, the phone is gone. Last year, I was visiting home for the weekend and I had a dream that I was on the 3rd floor again. I can't recall what led up to it, but I needed to go into another room. As I approached the closed door, it flew open and some unseen entity dragged me in, and I was yelling and screaming, trying to crawl my way out. But once I reached the threshold of the door and crossed over, it closed, and I was enveloped in darkness. That's where I woke up screaming in a cold sweat. And that's why I'm afraid of the 3rd floor. Next story. When I was 11 or 12, I moved into a townhouse with my family. We'd heard the previous owner, who rented it before us, was a real jerk to his tenants. The last one was so pissed he ripped the dishwasher out of the wall and left with it. I moved into a room upstairs, and weird stuff happened all the time. My stereo would change volume from time to time for no reason. I'd wake up and feel like someone was sitting on my chest, and my cat would go mental at night sometimes for no reason, and just in or around my room. We had 2 mysteries that I think this presence was responsible for. The first was the closet door in my room. When we first moved in, there was what looked like a fire pattern on the lower part of the door in the wood grain. I didn't pay much attention to it for a few months. That is, until a couple of additions appeared on the door. First, I noticed crows at the top of the door. Well, birds, simple birds. Then a woman holding her stomach, walking in the fire. The woman was about 1.5 feet high, maybe a foot at its widest. Later, another figure was added in the distance, but it was never clear who it could be. The next was really odd. I was on my way downstairs to the basement when I smelled something odd in the living room. The entire living room and basement reeked of alcohol. Having no one in the house at the time that drank, I was confused. As I'm walking down to the basement stairs, I looked up at the wall above the stairs. There was a 2 by 2 square stain of goo. Seriously, goo. It was what I was smelling. It took forever to clean it up, and the smell stayed there for days. It's strange because there is no plumbing or anything in that wall. Everything was in the opposite wall. The door was removed about 2 years ago and everything stopped. I wasn't told of the repair, so unfortunately I never took a picture of it. Just came home one day to a new white door and a quiet room. So the mystery remained a mystery. Next story. I still don't know how to explain it. About 2 years ago, my sister, her infant nephew, and I moved into an apartment that we later discovered was used as an elderly community. From the moment we moved in, we felt uneasy. The weird feeling wasn't enough to get us to ditch our seemingly awesome apartment though, especially not a cheap 2 bedroom that allowed dogs and had a pool. A few months after moving in, weird stuff started happening. Shadows moving in otherwise still room, objects not being where they had been left, baby toys talking to themselves in dark rooms. Just the kind of thing to make your skin crawl. To make matters worse, even when it was bloody hot outside, my bedroom would be freezing, and the closet door was always broken in an open position. It didn't matter how often we would get it fixed, it would instantly be broken again. Now, this is where it gets a little crazy. One morning, I woke up and my bed had been moved. I hadn't even as much as wrinkled my sheets while sleeping, yet my bed had been slid 3 feet away from the wall. I then began having pretty intense night terrors. I jump out of bed screaming and throwing my blankets, begging for my sister to save me. This would happen 3 times a night. One night, I had a particularly vivid night terror, only I didn't feel frightened. I jumped up in bed, looked around and saw eyes peering around my broken closet door. I leaned in and saw a man, mid-20s, staring back at me. I said in the calmest voice I could muster, "I'm going to give you a few minutes alone, but then you need to leave." I stumbled to the living room and sat on the couch for 10 minutes, then walked back to my bed. From that moment on, no more baby toys talked. My closet door closed with ease and my bedroom was a normal temperature.